Vijay, and welcome back to the committee program. We have with us friend of the show, Vijay Prashad. Vijay, Happy New Year. How are you?
Happy New Year. It's great to be with you, and I really do like that charming, happy cat, lucky cat. I hope you have a lot of luck this year.
Thank you.
Is that also a puffin beside the cat?
That is a puffin. That is Oscar the puffin. I was in an airport on Ambien, which, as you know, is a very powerful sleep drug. And when I came home, Oscar came after that. So something happened in the Iceland airport, and a star was born. And that's Oscar.
That's amazing. Well done.
Yeah, thank
well
you.
played.
So before we jump into the farmers' protest movement in India, which I think a lot of our viewers want to understand more about and that a new chapter is unfolding on, I just quickly, you are in Chile, you know a lot about politics, you know a lot of the players. How is it going for President Boric? And I say this because it's so easy to have this black and white fascism versus the left, you know, black and white election, and then, oh my God, you win and everything becomes grayscale. Has that happened yet?
Well, everything should be a little grayscale anyway, in my opinion, because we are in a very difficult situation globally, you know, and if you look at all of Latin America, South America in particular, it's not been easy for a progressive government to move an agenda. Looking north to Peru, where Pedro Castillo won an election, man of the teachers union, pushed up by the mass movements and so on. Immense pressure on his government from, let's say, entities unnamed. His links to his own political party, Peru Libre, were cut. His ties to the leader of that party, Vladimir Serrano, severed. He's relatively isolated and has had to move to seek support from sections of the right. Now that's in Peru, you know, which just had a triumphant election, the victory of the left and so on. But the space of maneuver very much narrowed. In Argentina, where Alberto Fernandez has been the president for a while, space of maneuver immensely narrowed. There, we don't have to guess who the agents of that narrowing have been. It was the IMF. They essentially told the Argentinians, either you follow our mandate or, you know, we're going to flush you down the toilet. We're going to cut you off. Argentina couldn't afford that. Alberto Fernandez had to therefore start playing, you know, in the big sandbox. Couldn't stand outside and say, you know, we're going to change things. Very difficult. Boric himself, Gabriel Boric, not a man of the left as such. He's a student leader, a centrist politician, you know, was the candidate of the Broad Front, which included the Communist Party, included various left factions, and so on. But he himself comes from the social democratic wing of Chilean politics. It's an enormous achievement that he was able to lead the Broad Front to defeat the right in the election, particularly given the fact that the right wing was not just a right wing, but led by a fascist. It said a lot that he was able to defeat that fascist. You know, when I talked to his main advisor, Giorgio Jackson, last year, Giorgio Jackson said, look, it's going to be difficult to advance a left agenda immediately. The culture of Chile is not going to permit it. The real hope is in the Constituent Assembly, where a new constitution is being written. And I think it's the combination of three things. On the one side, sustained protests that started in 2019. If those protests end, people go back home, I don't think it's going to be as much to celebrate in the year ahead. So the sustained protest, if this continues, if the Constituent Assembly is able to produce a viable, good constitution, the word viable is important. It has to be something that even the right accepts. You know, if they completely reject it, you might enter into uncharted terrain. So it has to be a viable, nonetheless left, constitution. By left, I simply mean, and this is what Giorgio Jackson said, look, most people agree with the social agenda. Even if you establish that say Chile is a plurinational country, you know, the Mapuche and others have a role in it and so on. Even if you establish that, that's an enormous difference from the Pinochet constitution of 1980. So basically, that's the second thing. And the third thing added to that is what Boric can move. You know, the agenda he can move is not easy. The reason I say that is that for the first year, he actually has to govern with Pinera's budget. He can't have his own budget immediately.
Yeah.
That traps you, man. That's how
A budget is a literal blueprint for what you
you
can do. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
tough.
but the thing is, people don't realize that. And so then when they see him govern with Pinera's budget, they'll start to criticize him. And that's a problem. There has to be a kind of, cold rationality when the left comes to power, or even the center left comes to power. There has to be a cold rationality. We have to push what is possible, not just immediately say, let's do everything. And I think that's going to be the challenge. So when you said black and white, grayscale, and so on, I hope everything is a little bit in grayscale, frankly.
Yeah. No, I know. And our tendency is to want to polarize and to push and to make easy decisions. And when it comes to an election, right? I'm not a journalist. I'm a political campaigner. Making that very clear choice very clear is, when you have what seems like such a clear choice, you feel lucky, where you're like, I'm, presenting the voters with a 0 or a 1. But you're right, it never is just a 0 or a 1. Shifting gears, but also I think in terms of the world of what is possible. Look, since 2020, we have seen these farmer protests in India. Lots of people have been inspired by them. Marches on Delhi, culminating in late November, actual repeal of these farm bills that were so unpopular with the agricultural sector in India. I just wanted to hear from you a bit about how you thought, the origins, and people don't know much about what it was, and it's so important because we know that next week there's actually going to be, they're all getting together, the farmers' movement, and forming a political party. And talking about changing from black and white to grayscale, that's changing from black and white to Technicolor.
Well, that's well put. Look, there's a broad thing that we have across the world of an attempt by global capitalism. Capitalism always wants to get the best deal against the workers. That's just, the normal thing. There's been an attempt to use advances in technology, particularly in the kind of ubiquity of smartphones and apps. There's been an attempt to move to kind of Uberized labor. Just as you have the Uber driver who drives you around from here to there, you have now kind of Uberized food delivery, Uberized grocery shopping, In fact, Amazon is a kind of precursor to Uber because really Amazon was Uberizing shopping, I don't know why we don't call it Amazoning, but at any rate, it's Uberizing. The Indian government moved to kind of Uberize farmers, to use a concentrated marketplace run by big capitalist firms to make decisions on pricing and so on, and have farmers who are basically then, essentially would be made into a kind of subcontractor of an agricultural app. That's how the marketplace was going to, that was the fantasy of the marketplace that the Modi government pushed through in three bills in 2020. They kind of hammered these bills through. There was no question of democracy. There was no debate on the bills. Essentially, as I say, if you don't want to get into the details of it, they wanted to Uberize Indian farming. And that's the reason on the 26th of November of 2020, farmers joined a nationwide labor protest. 250 million workers struck on the 26th of November. But that was the inauguration of the farmer protest. And from that day onwards, farmers, now I use the word farmer advisedly. These are not necessarily agricultural workers, even though they came and participated. These are farmers, including pretty big farmers. That's why you saw in the images at the various checkpoints where farmers came and set up encampments. Farmers came in tractors. They came on trucks. They brought heavy machinery. Agricultural workers don't own tractors, man.
No, it's true. It was serious business. These were like tanks coming down the street. It was big stuff.
That's right. Yeah. They brought essentially the heavy artillery of agriculture to these points and set up checkpoints, barricades. Said we are not going to, we're going to enter Delhi, or we're not allowing anybody to come in or leave. So their protest, which starts on the 26th of November 2020, was actually a kind of almost cross-class protest of agriculture against the government, especially in the northern states of Uttar Pradesh, Western Uttar Pradesh, Punjab and Haryana. These were the key states, although I must say there was mass support for this protest elsewhere. The reason these three states were key is they're near Delhi. And the farmers decided to come and essentially garrison Delhi. They can only come from there. It's really hard to come, say, from Maharashtra. Although huge detachment of farmers did come from Maharashtra, that was not the bulk of them. In Punjab, Haryana, and Western Uttar Pradesh, almost all the farming areas had large delegations at these points, and entire communities were committed to it. This was old-fashioned labor organizing, where I'm an agriculturalist, me and my family and so on, we participate, but then our neighbors who are not agriculturalists also get involved. They donate money, they come and donate food, they help provide things, or they say, leave your children with us while you go to the site, we'll raise your children while you're away, And as the protest went from 1 week, 1 month to a year, this community support was essential. Imagine that, like entire family has gone to demonstrate. All the young children and grandchildren were left with the neighbors and so on. That means it becomes a community struggle. I want to emphasize this. The whole community got involved in this. This was very interesting because the Indian government tried all it could do. The Modi government did everything it could do to break the unity of the strike. They said, look, they are anti-national. That's a term of art in India, anti-national. Yep. Or that they are, terrorists. They are Khalistanis, referring to the secessionist movement in Punjab, which has long died out. They were using these terms. At which point, and this is interesting because from the time of the British rule, a lot of recruitment of the military took place in Punjab and in Haryana. So these farmer families that had come and were in protest were being told, you are terrorists, you are anti-national, you are Khalistanis. Their children who were in the military, serving children in the military, came to the protest sites and said, I am a Jawan, I am a soldier, my parents are Kisans, they are farmers, the unity of Kisans and Jawans is integral, you can't break it. They threw their medals, it's a significant sight. This surprised the Modi government. Then they tried to create a kind of faux farmers organization to start negotiations with. Nobody would have it, It's a classic technique of companies, right? You say, well, we're talking to the official union. What official union? It's the cousin of the owner's friend or whatever, some joke. Rejected by the farmers. They refused all these things. They came there with a very credible set of demands, which included things like subsidies for agriculture, but also withdrawal of bills that diminished the citizenship standing of Muslims. In other words, they had a political consciousness. This is important. Yeah. They were not just fighting on economic lines. We want the withdrawal of these farm bills, etc. Yes, they had those. That's a core demand. But they had a lot of political demands there as well, which included, better education systems and so on. People have not focused on that. And that's why it's interesting that they have a political consciousness now. So this was their demand structure. They came to negotiate with Modi, couldn't get headway. Then Modi had two choices, basically. It's a line from Capital, Either you surrender or you use force. And I think the Indian government at some point, there was a lot of debate in Delhi, but at some point the government felt we'd have to kill a lot of people to crush this rebellion. We'd have to kill a lot of people on live TV,
right.
Social
media. Starts to be a PR problem at some point. Yeah.
Yeah, we're just not going to do this. And so Modi surrendered. This is the second time he's surrendered on any policy in his period since 2014. The previous time was also because of farmer unrest, just to put this on the table, that the farmers twice have defeated Modi. Only twice he's had to back off from anything since 2014.
It's incredible. I mean, how much of that is like, well, let me ask this in a different way. So, my people are farmers from UP. A lot of them are very conservative politically. How much were these folks formerly part of Modi's base? How much were they apolitical and this drew them in? It sounds to me like they are coming from politics if they have a political program that doesn't spontaneously, emerge.
Well, look, it's a range of people. This was a mass struggle, and mass struggles by their character exceed political organization. That's the nature of a mass struggle. Political organization is so important to give mass struggle shape and form. And so the communist trade unions played a major role. The All India Kisan Sabha played a major role. Nobody denies that. Mr. Tikayat, for instance, whose political party, the Bharat Kisan Union, played a big role in this. One of the major farmers' unions, major farmers' unions, played a major role. But this protest, as it became a mass struggle, it completely exceeded these political formations. And then it draws in people who might have been supporters of Modi, which is why it gets complicated because we have elections coming. They might have supported Modi, whether passively or not. And actually, more important than that, in Punjab, where Modi's party, the BJP, is not able to win on its own, had been in alliance with the Akali Dal. And the Akali Dal's base was being stripped through these protest movements, where many Akali supporters had come out in protest, and they were turning on the Akali Dal party and saying, why are you in alliance with a government that's essentially assassinating us? Similarly, in UP, in Western UP, that section of Western UP that runs from the Uttarakhand border, goes all the way down to Delhi, that entire belt of Jat farmers. These Jat farmers had basically given themselves over into various alliances with the BJP, that's Modi's party in UP. And now the Jat farmers and their main political instrument, led by the son of the great Charan Singh, that instrument is moved away from the BJP. So, it's true that the farmers' movement has had a political impact. Of course, it will be tested in the polls, right? You can't just say, yes, it's had an impact. The polls are a kind of test. I mean, I'm willing to concede that. Yes, it will be tested in the polls, but we can already see anxiety. And in many ways, the reason for that surrender in November of 2021 was Modi understood there are elections in Punjab, there are elections in UP, in Uttar Pradesh, there are elections in Uttarakhand. And these are very important because this is the big catchment area of BJP support. The Hindu right cannot win in South India. It has to overwhelmingly win in northern India.
Rack it all up, yeah.
If it doesn't, it's a catastrophe. So yeah, it's a big issue.
And of course, the pressure is what makes people make mistakes, especially when they have big personalities. And so it does present an opportunity. But it's this next step that's tricky, right? As we discussed, even next week, a lot of the folks from this thing that was a movement and not a political party is trying to form a political party. Can you tell us a little more about what they're thinking and the pitfalls ahead? And, this is so much of a bigger thing. But I do a lot of work in Italy, and I'm reminded of the Sardines movement and the instant that they said they had this was people coming to the piazzas everywhere, and the instant they had a political program, they were done. It was, X thing.
Yeah, so, we're talking about India, where in India, jockeying is sometimes as important as the final, stamp on the table. I think it was not inevitable that these formations, particularly the Samyukta Kisan Morcha, the SKM, it's not actually inevitable that they would come in this direction. Because after all, it's a broad front platform for the farmers' movement. So I don't know where this is going to go. I think the announcement we're entering politics and so on might be a pressure campaign against the established political parties. Look, frankly, in these kind of situations, it's all about alliance building. And as in the case of Western UP, the Samajwadi party of Akhilesh Yadav has made an alliance with Charan Singh's great party, the Lokdal party, because you want that fraction of the Jat vote to come to the Samajwadi vote, break away from the BJP and so on. So how to consolidate the anti-BJP sentiment in Western UP, that becomes an issue. Whether they'll succeed or not, we'll see. Because, the Hindu right is also keen on polarizing the election on religious lines. We can talk about that later. But in Punjab, it's a different story. Because in Punjab, it's generally been a two-way election between the BJP and the Akalis on the one side and the Congress and its allies on the other. What role will this Farmers Alliance play in Punjab? Will it be able to consolidate another bloc? Is it a pressure campaign to push for the farmers' issues to be at the center of the Punjab election? See, that could just be what they're going for. And I think that's smart. You create some kind of block. You say our program of 14, 18 points, that we put at the table. We want the Punjab election to be about that. We want it to be a referendum on our platform. And then you force the Congress and the Akalis and the BJP and all to actually come to your agenda. You see, there's a couple of ways elections take place. One is you make it a referendum on the incumbent. This is the government. They have done nothing. So let's throw them out. Or if the incumbent has had a successful tenure, the incumbent says, look at my record, look how useless the opposition is, let's have an election.
Yeah.
This is the way bourgeois elections works. It's basically about incumbency. That's how it goes. Now what the farmers, I think, are trying to do, from what I'm understanding and what I'm hearing from people, is that they are saying, no, let's make the election about our program. I think that's very interesting. That's a rare thing in Indian politics, and rare thing in bourgeois politics, where even, when you say in Italy, let's go from the plazas to political thing. Well, what's the agenda? Are you strong enough to make this a referendum, say, on the agenda of austerity? Are you strong enough to do that? I don't think you're strong enough. You're just moving a mass mobilization into political organization. That often fails if you don't have a strategic vision. And I think from what I'm hearing, because remember, it's a big coalition, lots of people. It could be that Tikayat is just doing this as his political vehicle. One guy, a very popular farmer leader, is saying, I want to have more political power. So could be that they have decided, let's try to make the election a referendum on us. I think if that's the case, if the Punjab election to some extent, not entirely, but to some extent becomes a referendum on the farmers' demands, you'll have a much richer democratic experience this year, frankly. Then you'll have a richer democratic than what you're definitely going to see in Uttar Pradesh and in Uttarakhand. Two states where the BJP is powerful, where they are desperate to make it an election about Muslims. Desperate. They are so desperate. They don't want this to be an election on class lines. Because, look, frankly, no bourgeois government wants to see class issues be the dominant issues. They would prefer the so-called cultural battles. The culture wars are such a safe place to have a political disagreement. Let's have a battle about critical race theory in the United States.
Totally.
What? Critical race theory? 99% of the people have no clue what you're talking about. Basically, it's about racism or something or the other. White people not wanting to feel bad about themselves.
It's just the alienation from politics is the goal, and it works. Yeah.
It works, right? It completely works. Have a real debate about real issues? Let's not today. Not today. I mean, you're sitting in Germany, right? Look at the election that took place in Germany. I mean, I couldn't make head or tail what the election was about. It seemed to me the election was who's going to be the closest heir apparent to Angela Merkel. That's not a democratic election.
And even then, it was barely that. The way gaffes got covered in this election, you would have thought it was an American election, to be honest. Like the way that just the crap rose to the surface. But look, well, not even. He is an unorthodox thinker, and that's why we like him. But Marx would remind us that it's conditions, but also personalities. What can you tell us about some of the personalities who will emerge in this transition into politics, who may become leaders of the movement? We know Balbir Singh. Who are some of these folks we should be keeping an eye on?
Yeah, I mean, look, frankly, the main characters are Mr. Tikayat, who is, he played a big role initially. Let's go back a little bit. I mean, Rakesh Tikayat's father was the real guy, Mahendra Singh Tikayat. He was the real leader of the farmers' leader. He comes from Muzaffarnagar district in Uttar Pradesh. He was considered the Chaudhry, I mean, like he was a big guy. He came from old power, the kind of old village power, the cup power of Western UP. So Mr. Mahendra Singh Tikayat, he created the initial political organizations. He was well known to bring hundreds of thousands of farmers from Western UP into Delhi to demand, that the government continues subsidy regimes and so on. I mean, I well remember in 1988 when Mahendra Singh Tikayat brought 500,000 farmers, maybe more, to Delhi during Rajiv Gandhi's government, brought them in there to demand things like higher sugarcane prices. These were all specific farmer-related issues. Higher sugarcane prices was a big issue at that time as India was entering into the kind of liberalization period, cutting subsidies on water for farmers, a very key issue, water, electricity prices, things like that. So Mahendra Singh Tikayat made his name in that. He became a big farm leader, but didn't convert actually into any kind of politics. I mean, he supported various political leaders back and forth and so on, but that was not his main thing. His main thing was he constructed himself as the farm leader. It's his son actually, Mr. Rakesh Tikayat, who is one of the key figures in this Samyukta, or rather first the Bharat Kisan Union, the Indian Kisan Union, which is a constituent of the SKM. Samyukta, the group that's going to most likely be, we're not sure yet, but most likely it will form something or the other. So Mr. Rakesh Tikayat, he is a very interesting guy, very charismatic farmer leader, developed his father's base, brought it into, in a sense, this protest movement, played a key role here. I mean, if you think about the 4 or 5 people who played a important role, he is there. The leaders of the All India Kisan Sabha, which is the communist group, they are there and so on. Unlike his father, Rakesh Tikayat has already been a pretty important political figure. He's run for office in the Rashtriya Lokdal seat and so on. So they are still, he is a prominent person like that, not a kind of, like his father, mainly an agricultural leader. He's already danced in politics. This organization, the Rashtriya Lokdal, is interesting. It was founded by another great Western UP Chaudhary, Chaudhary Charan Singh, who is also Prime Minister of India. His son, Ajit Singh, developed the Rashtriya Lokdal, and he is the one who's gone into alliance with the Samajwadi Party of Akhilesh Yadav in Uttar Pradesh. Now, Uttar Pradesh is really important because the BJP has a super majority in the state house. By the way, we talk about states. It's a state of 204 million people. It's the largest state in India. It's a country by itself, okay? And it's enormous, and it has a range of different cultures and communities and so on. But if Akhilesh Yadav, if this alliance with Ajit Singh lasts, and if they are able in Uttar Pradesh to make the election to some extent about the farmers' struggle, this will have an impact. If they can prevent the BJP from making it an election about Muslims, it'll have an impact. So you got to watch out for what the Bharatiya Lokdal does, whether they'll maintain that alliance with Akhilesh Yadav. You got to look and see what Rakesh Tikayat does, whether the Bharatiya Kisan Union is actually going to create a political organization or whether that's an organization to move an agenda. Let's see, I mean, I'm always wary even when things are launched in India. You'll have a launch party today and tomorrow you hear news they've made an alliance with somebody else. And then that launch was mainly, it's like building a raft, you see, to cross the river to your destination. It's not actually a boat. It's just a temporary raft. So, I mean, I'm very cautious. But these are the people to look at, carefully. The communists who played a major role in the protests don't have any electoral chances in any of these states. Partly because the communist apparatus, the kind of election apparatus, the money needed and so on is not available. See, it's a fascinating thing. Many years ago, I campaigned with my comrades for Subhashini Ali in Kanpur, which is in Uttar Pradesh. It's a major industrial city. Subhashini was running for the Indian Parliament from there. And when we campaigned in the workers' areas, we'd see red flags everywhere. From the center of Indian Trade Union, this is the Communist Union. The whole neighborhood seemed festooned with red flags. I went to many people's homes and said, will you vote for Comrade Subhashini Ali? She's the daughter of Captain Lakshmi Sehgal. Captain Lakshmi led the Rani of Jhansi Brigade with Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose against the British, in Burma and so on. She was a heroic figure. And she was a heroic doctor in Kanpur. And here's her daughter, who is a great leader herself, running. And they would say, listen, we love you guys. We are with the red flag in the factory. But when it comes to voting in elections, we have to vote for the Congress. And I'd say, why? They said, because the Congress can get us electricity connections. They can get my son a job. Right. They can do this. Patron-client stuff that the left, honestly, that's not our agenda. We want to create massive social change. We're not sure about patron-client, networks and so on. Look, I agree. All change happens from individuals, but it's not by dispensing goodies, That's the nature of elections in India. So the left actually played an outsized role in this protest movement. And I think that's important to register, but you can't translate that into elections. So it's down to these sorts of plebeian parties, By plebeian, I mean, these are not working class parties. They are not, necessarily farmer parties. They are popular parties. They have some popular base. And it's down to them to defeat the BJP, which is the party of money.
And that's the ingredient, right? Like, we want to see mass parties, right? Parties that actually represent masses and not individual interests. The last thing I do want to ask you, though, is on the other side, the right. Modi has upended politics in so many ways. What can we expect? How do you think it will play out in terms of, and again, this is, where a lot of my family's from, so I see it happen, into anti-Muslim feelings, etc.
Well, the town where Mr. Tikayat is from had a terrible communal riot. Communal is a bizarre, again, a term of art from India. It refers essentially to sectarian pogrom-like violence. In 2013, the BJP is a master of using this kind of violence, anti-Muslim violence in particular, but sometimes caste violence, to create a kind of toxic environment, polarize the electorate and bring large numbers of Hindus to vote, saying that there's a Muslim threat or there's a low caste threat or whatever, something like that. They are masters of this. 2013, they did it very successfully in anticipation of the 2014 election. Again, they continued to use this technique. On the 17th of December, 17th, 18th, 19th of December 2021, in the town of Haridwar, which is up in Uttarakhand, there was a so-called Dharam Sansad held. Dharam Sansad is like a religious assembly or religious parliament. It was called a Dharam Sansad held in Islamic India. I don't know what they were talking about. What Islamic India? There is no Islamic India. Okay, there is 1.4 billion people in India. Of them, about 200 plus million Muslims are in India. That's a lot of Muslims, okay? But there's no Islamic India. This is nuts. This is part of the right-wing fantasy that Hinduism is under threat from these, Muslim hordes or whatever, Mongol Muslim horde, Mughal hordes. I don't know what it is. It's an old paranoia. Used to be a paranoia that said that Muslim birth rates were higher than Hindu birth rates. So therefore either have more children or, kill them or whatever. I don't know what, it was quite ghastly, but it's this kind of seam of paranoia that is there in the Hindu hard right. And so this Dharam Sansad was held where these leaders dressed in saffron robes, okay, these pseudo-religious leaders stood there and said, go and kill Muslims. They actually said, go kill Muslims. If 20 of you kill 100 of them, they were in that kind of language. Government of India, the government of Uttarakhand, which is a BJP government, they did not arrest these people because this is straight incitement to violence. These people roamed around. 2 days later, 4-5 of these same so-called sadhus went to a police station and they filed a case against the Quran, okay, and against so-called Maulvis, meaning Muslims, leaders, they filed a case against the Quran. And there's a video of them filing the document, okay. One of the women, she's a sadhvi, she says to the police officer, I hope you're not biased against us. biased on their behalf. Their meaning Muslims. One of the other sadhus standing there says, don't worry, he is biased for us. I mean, there's no case against anybody. Like, this is crazy. This is the kind of attempt to create polarization, violence, anxiety, all this stuff. Make it an election about Muslims. That's what the BJP would like to do. It's hardly democratic. You know, this is actually against the Indian Constitution, to be completely clear with you.
And it's so close to that press conference in Florida. You remember where the guy just had a press conference just to burn a Quran? You know, you're like, it's like, I get that it's supposed to be some sort of weird hate-filled thing, but I don't even know what you're doing exactly, right? Like, it's hard to even wrap your head around it.
Look, burn a Quran, at least there's something tangible. You've gone to the police station and said, I am going to file a case against the Quran.
Right. There's a little extra special surrealism that India puts on it.
I mean,
put a stamp on that form.
Like, who do you arrest? Yeah. Do you go and arrest all the Qurans? I mean, what are you supposed to do? Like, every single edition of the Quran must be proscribed now. Is that what they want? Censorship of the Quran. That's interesting. Well, no, they don't actually. They know they can't get that. They know they can't kill all the Muslims.
They want the fight. They want the fight.
They want the anxiety among Hindu voters, so they'll come vote in droves and vote back in Yogi Adityanath in Uttar Pradesh, who's a nutcase. The chief minister of Uttar Pradesh is a genuine nutcase. I mean, I really... many years ago, a leader of the Hindu right came to me. Many years, I was a young man. He's a very senior person. He became the Home Minister of India. He came to me at a gathering and he knew me as a journalist and he said to me, listen, Vijay, you can criticize us as much as you want. If you make fun of us, be careful. It's one of the most chilling things senior politicians ever said to me. If you make fun of us, be careful. Yeah, but I, given that warning, I still say that the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh is a nutcase. And, you know, Uttar Pradesh deserves better. It deserves rational leadership. I'm sorry, I'm not a modernizer kind of person, you know, anti-tradition or whatever. I'm not that kind of person. But you certainly require some kind of, you know, leadership of a place of 200 million people that subscribes to modern science, that understands, you know, WHO regulations, that knows how to tackle a pandemic. You know, you can't have modern civilization with people like that in charge. I mean, maybe this sounds elitist, but it doesn't matter. I'm happy to go on the record saying that I would like to have a rational person be in charge of 200 million people.
Totally. Look, thank you so much, and we'll definitely want to check in as those elections come closer. But do you have anything you're working on you'd like to tell folks about before I let you go?
Well, we are talking, not while we are talking, but just before you called me, I was finishing up a book that I'm doing with Noam Chomsky called The Withdrawal. The subtitle is explanatory. It's Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and the Fragilities of US Power. And it's a really exciting book because we are kind of looking back from Vietnam to the present about the ways in which US power is exercised and how weakened it has become. Now, we don't have a good theory of why it's as weak as it is because that requires a whole different kind of look. But it's a pretty damn good book. And it essentially is a kind of run through Noam's ideas since Vietnam. You know, people will be interested. I asked him a question when we were getting to work on it. I asked him, you know, Noam, where do you get the courage to do this? And he said, it's not my courage, it's the courage of the Vietnamese. And then he talks about the Tet Offensive. And he tries to explain what courage is and how courage is in, you know, Colombian peasants in southern Colombia, or courage is in the Kurds in southeastern Turkey, or courage is in the Palestinians. He said, those are three examples of courage. Not me, you know, writing books and giving speech. I thought that was such a moving answer. I'm really proud of this book.
Yeah, and it's cool to sort of take something like this on, even as we're in the fish tank, sort of seeing it happen in the choke points of power, how fragile they are, how fragile all these systems are. These things that seem invincible, it takes one boat in the Suez Canal to foul up the whole thing, right? So,
very well said. That was what? The Ever Given or whatever it is. What a great name. Yeah, very well said.
Yeah. Look, thanks so much for coming on, Vijay. We're always super happy to have you. And shout out to all my people in Barot and Kasampur and in all over UP. Ciao.